ahead with chapter 18. Maharaj Parikshit cursed by a Brahmana boy. Text 1. Suta uvacha yo vai draunastra viplushto na matur udare mritaha anugrahad bhagavatah Krishnasyadbhuta karmanaha. Sri Sutta Goswami said, due to the mercy of the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna who acts wonderfully, Maharaj Parikshit, though struck by the weapon of the son of Drona in his mother's womb, could not be burnt. Purport. The sages of Naimisharanya became struck with wonder after hearing about the wonderful administration of Maharaj Parikshit, especially in reference to his punishing the personality of Kali and making him completely unable to do any harm within the kingdom. Sutta Goswami was equally anxious to describe Maharaj Parikshit's wonderful birth and death, and this verse is stated by Sutta Goswami to increase the interest of the sages of Naimisharanya. Nobody told that point regarding Maharaj Parikshit's dealing with Kali. So how did Maharaj Parikshit deal with Kali? So what all places he gave to Kali to reside?
Yutam Panam Striya Shuna, and then wherever gold is there.
Right. So yes, so those 5 places were given to Kali, and especially gold standardization. So seeing this wonderful reign of Maharaj Parikshit, the sages of Naimisharanya became struck with wonder. And Sutta Goswami is sort of reminding them of the glory of Parikshit Maharaj and how he was protected by the Lord within the womb. Anugrahat Bhagavataha. So by the mercy of the Supreme Lord, he was protected. Krishnasya Adbhuta Karmana. So because of Krishna's wonderful activities, so therefore Maharaj Parikshit was saved within the womb itself. Text 2. Furthermore, Maharaj Parikshit was always consciously surrendered to the personality of Godhead, and therefore he was neither afraid nor overwhelmed by fear due to a snake bird which was to bite him because of the fury of a Brahmana boy. And so here Sutta Goswami is talking about what's going to happen to Maharaj Parikshit. And even though he was going to be bitten by the snake bird, but he was not afraid. Prabhupada writes, a self-surrendered devotee of the Lord is called Narayana Parayana. Such a person is never afraid of any place or person, not even of death. For him, nothing is as important as the Supreme Lord, and thus he gives equal importance to heaven and hell. So we know the famous verse told by Lord Shiva to Mother Parvati, Narayana Parayana, na kutushana bibhiti swarga apavarga narkeshu apitulyartha darshanaha. So a devotee is not afraid of any place because he has taken full shelter of the Lord. So he's fearless. There are some lectures where Srila Prabhupada is speaking on this point, and Prabhupada says, as far as devotee is concerned, he's ready to even go to hell to preach. The devotee is fearless because he knows that the Lord will definitely protect. Avashya Rakshabhe Krishna. So that's the attitude of the devotee. He's always fearless. And of course, Srila Prabhupada himself exhibited that great fearlessness in going to the West at the age of 70, and then he did this amazing task. So further down in the purport, Prabhupada says, he knew, Parikshit Maharaj, he knew that Narayana, Lord Krishna, had saved him when he was burnt in the womb of his mother, and if he were to be killed by a snake bite, it would also take place by the will of the Lord. The devotee never goes against the will of the Lord. Anything sent by God is a blessing for the devotee. Therefore, Maharaj Parikshit was neither afraid of nor bewildered by such things. That is the sign of a pure devotee of the Lord. So, So a devotee has full faith that ultimately whatever the Lord does is for his benefit, as we were discussing yesterday also. The acharyas give the example of the father, just like the father sometimes slaps the child, sometimes embraces the child, but ultimately whatever the Lord does is for the benefit of the child. And so similarly, the devotee has full faith that whatever the Lord does is for his benefit. And so therefore, the devotee understands that whatever the Lord does is a blessing, and therefore he never goes against the will of the Lord. So we know how Srila Prabhupada, even when the bombs were falling, later on in the lecture also Srila Prabhupada says that even if the bomb falls, we see Krishna in the form of the bomb. So that's the conviction of the devotee. Doesn't matter. Of course, Krishna. As we were discussing yesterday, devotee is not foolish. Prabhupada also speaks about this. Devotee is not foolish. It's not that if a tiger is coming, it's not that the devotee willingly goes into the mouth of the tiger. So, or the devotee doesn't walk into an infected place without taking precautions. So devotee is not foolish. Devotee will do the needful to protect himself, but then ultimately he knows that ultimately it's Krishna who's going to protect. So in the recent pandemic and this coronavirus, so much talk is going on. So it's the same principle. The devotee does the needful to take care, but at the same time, ultimately the devotee depends on the Lord's protection. That's the symptom of surrender. Avashya Rakshabe Krishna. Not that the devotee is in constant fear, whether I'm going to die, I'm not going to die. So no. So the devotee does the needful, takes the necessary precautions, and then goes ahead with his devotional service. And so Parikshit Maharaj was also fearless, as we will see as the pastime goes on. So here Sutta Goswami is describing about Maharaj Parikshit. Furthermore, after leaving all his associates, the king surrendered himself as a disciple to the son of Yashodhya Goswami, and thus he was able to understand the actual position of the personality of Godheads. So here Prabhupada writes, but by the grace of a spiritual master like Shukadeva Goswami, unto whom the king gave himself up as a most humble disciple, one is able to understand the actual position of the Lord, his eternal abode, and his transcendental paraphernalia in the dham or abode. Knowing the transcendental position of the Lord and the transcendental method by which one can approach that transcendental dham, the king was confident about his ultimate destination, and by knowing this, he could leave aside everything material, even his own body, without any difficulty of attachment. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated, Param Drishwa Nivartate, one can give up all connection with material attachment when one is able to see the Param, or the superior quality of things. Okay, so one point is that one can understand about the Lord and all the various activities, paraphernalia, dham, etc. about the Lord, one can understand by the grace of the spiritual master. That's the only way one can understand. I think so in one of our previous discussions, we were discussing the point that spiritual knowledge cannot be understood simply by scholarship or simply by austerities or any other means. Those are not the methods to understand, because the Lord is adokshaja, the Lord is inconceivable. And so therefore, the only way to understand is by grace. Yasya deve parabhakti yatha deve tata guru tasyete katithai artha prakashante mahatmanaha. So it is only by the grace of Guru and Krishna, when one has faith, as much faith in the Supreme Lord, same faith in the Guru. With that faith, when one follows the instructions, then all the imports of the Vedic knowledge are revealed. And so therefore, our process, as we were discussing in one of the previous quotes of Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada says that our process, the process of devotional service, is a process of grace. So we are dependent on the grace, the mercy of Guru and Krishna. That's what differentiates the path of Bhakti Yoga and the path of Karma Jnana Yoga, where the individuals are mostly dependent on their own endeavors. But on the path of devotional service, we make our endeavors, but we know that ultimately we are so much dependent on grace. So therefore, then we have to perform all our activities in such a way so as to attract that grace. Because without that, we know that our own individual abilities and capacities would be totally insufficient and incapable in helping us to understand the Supreme Lord, the process of devotional service, and remain on the path of devotional service. And so therefore, we find that the devotees are very much interested in pleasing Guru and the Vaishnavas, because it's only by their grace that Krishna can be pleased, and then ultimately Krishna reveals. So therefore, a devotee is never overly dependent or proud of his own capabilities, because he knows that they are insufficient. And that's what Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has shown in the famous pastime of the milk drinking brahmachari. So who was performing a lot of austerity, but then Mahaprabhu made the point very clear that simply by austerities, one cannot understand the Supreme Lord. What was the qualification of Jatayu? What was the qualification of Hanuman? What was the qualification of the gopis? They didn't have any material qualifications, but the qualification which they had, which is required, is bhakti. Bhaktyamam amijanati. And bhakti means the attitude to please, the attitude to please Guru and Krishna. That's the attitude which attracts the grace, which attracts the blessings. And therefore we find so many disciples of Srila Prabhupada, their main focus was on how to please Srila Prabhupada. We know so many pastimes. Yamuna Mataji, ready to jump off the train to cook rice for Srila Prabhupada. So many pastimes like that. And so therefore then these devotees, because of that very, very strong faith in Srila Prabhupada and desire to please him, then we see the tremendous progress they made in a very short time. Because then that grace, that mercy just pulls a person up from whatever situation one may be in. That's the process of devotional service. And therefore we find throughout the Shastra, there are points made that even though one may be a Chandala, dog eater, doesn't matter. But if one takes to the process of devotional service, one can become more elevated than the Brahmanas. And then by that practice of devotional service, which attracts the grace, then there is param drishtva nivartate. So that param drishtva nivartate, that higher taste, is also obtained by grace. So because when Krishna reveals himself and one becomes attracted to Krishna, then there is no higher attraction than that. But then Krishna has to reveal himself for one to be attracted to Krishna. Otherwise, one will see the deity and see it as stone or wood, and everything spiritual is material, then there won't be much attraction. But then in order to develop that attraction also requires the grace. Then one can develop that param drishtva nivartate. And then one can give up connection with all that is material. So therefore, you see, towards the end of the purport, Prabhupada writes, by the grace of Lord Krishna, Maharaj Parikshit was able to receive the mercy of such a personality as Shukadeva Goswami, and thus he was able to know the actual position of the unconquerable Lord. It is very difficult to find the Lord from the Vedic literatures, but it's very easy to know him by the mercy of a liberated devotee like Shukadeva Goswami. So the point is very clear. And so by the grace of Krishna, Maharaj Parikshit got Shukadeva Goswami. By the grace of Krishna, one gets Guru, and by the grace of Guru, one gets Krishna. That's the statement there. So, Vedeshu Durlabam Adullabam Atma Bhakto. So simply by study of the Vedic literatures, one cannot understand. But it's only by the grace of Guru and Krishna one can understand. Text 4. This was so because those who have dedicated their lives to the transcendental topics of the personality of Godhead of whom the Vedic hymns sing, and who are constantly engaged in remembering the lotus feet of the Lord, do not run the risk of having misconceptions even at the last moment of their lives. So, Maharaj Parikshit, he didn't have any misconceptions, he didn't have any difficulties even at the last moment of his life, because he was Jushitam Tat Kathamritam. So he was totally absorbed in Kathamritam. So therefore, and he was Smaratam Tat Padam Bhujam. He was hearing Krishna Katha, remembering the lotus feet of the Lord. And so therefore, there was no bewilderment, there were no misconceptions at the last moment of life. So Prabhupada writes here, when the same, that is the Vedic hymns, is heard from an actual self-realized soul and is properly understood by service and submission, everything becomes transparently clear. Very important point. Thus, a submissive disciple is able to live transcendently and continue to the end of life. By scientific adaptation, one is able to remember the Lord even at the end of life, when the power of remembrance is slackened due to derangement of bodily membranes. For a common man, it is very difficult to remember things as they are at the time of death. But by the grace of the Lord and his bona fide devotees, the spiritual masters, one can get this opportunity without difficulty. And it was done in the case of Maharaj Parikshit. So here, the submissive disciple is able to live transcendently and continue to the end of life. Okay, so that's the quality which will help us continue devotional service till the end of life. It is that humility, submission. These are the qualities which attract the grace. And then that is what will help us continue devotional service. So if one becomes proud, arrogant, then one loses that grace. And then it becomes a struggle. So therefore, these qualities are so much emphasized. Because just like earlier on in the first canto, it's described about Sutta Goswami, why Sutta Goswami was empowered to speak. Snigdasya Shishyasya. So there also is mentioned, because Sutta Goswami himself was a gentle, humble disciple of his spiritual masters. Therefore, he was empowered to speak. So that's what attracts the grace. That's what attracts empowerment when one has that submissive service attitude. The famous examples are the difference between Ishwar Puri and Ramchandra Puri. So we know the difference. So Ishwar Puri was a humble, submissive disciple, serving his spiritual master in his final days, performing menial services. And on the other hand, Ramchandra Puri was criticizing, blaspheming devotees. And then he lost the grace, he lost the mercy. Madhavendra Puri told him, get out of here. I don't want to see your face. I don't know what will be our destination if I leave my body seeing your face. So, and then he became an impersonalist. A very rare example of an exalted Vaishnav, disciple of Madhavendra Puri, becoming an impersonalist because of losing the grace, because of not having that submissive service attitude. So that's what attracts the grace, and these are the qualities which we should strive to achieve in order to maintain that steadiness in the practice of devotional service. That steadiness is possible only by grace. What is our capacity to fight against the powerful material energy of the Lord? We are totally insignificant. But when we take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord by surrender, by service, then by their grace it will be possible. The example is given that just like sometimes even in a storm, the powerful elephants are also washed away by the flowing rivers, by the flowing waters. But yet, small fish, they are swimming blissfully in the waters. Why? Because they have taken shelter of the water. So, similarly, when one takes shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord by service and submission, then it is possible. Devesha gunamai mammaya duratiya mam evaye prapadyante maya metam prapadyate. Otherwise, what is our capacity to fight against the distractions and allurements of the material energy? So, and then by that grace, it will be possible to remember the Lord at the end of life. That's what Prabhupada writes again. By the grace of the Lord and his bona fide devotees, the spiritual masters, one can get this opportunity without difficulty. What opportunity? To remember the Lord at the time of death, which is the ultimate success. Antakale chamameva smaran muktva kalevaram ya prayati sabad bhavam yati nastyatra samshayah. So ultimately, whatever one remembers at the time of death, that's the destination what one will receive. Ante Narayana Smriti, that is our goal. But again, Prabhupada writes in the Bhagavad Gita purports, actually 8th chapter, read that remembrance of the Lord at the time of death is only possible by his grace. Otherwise, the situation of the body and the mind is totally deranged at the time of death. Very difficult. But Krishna has to give his own remembrance to the devotee. So that remembrance is only possible by his grace and the devotees. And so because Maharaj Parikshit was such an exalted submissive Vaishnava, so then it was possible for him. Text 5. As long as the great powerful son of Abhimanyu remains the emperor of the world, there is no chance that the personality of Kali will flourish. Prabhupada writes, that's good government. Text 6. The very day and moment the personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, left this earth, the personality of Kali, who promotes all kinds of irreligious activities, came into this world. This point we already had read, that how the moment the Lord had disappeared, then the personality of Kali took advantage. Prabhupada writes, so the principle is that yes, as long as the Lord is present, as long as the remembrance of the Lord is there, then the influence of Kali will not be there. So Prabhupada writes, and similarly, if there is an arrangement for the constant chanting of the holy names, qualities, etc. of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no chance at all for the personality of Kali to enter. That is the technique of driving away the personality of Kali from the worlds. And so he says this, so much means for sound vibration to be broadcast. So instead of vibrating some nuisance sound for sense enjoyment, if the state arranges to distribute transcendental sound by resounding the holy name, fame, and activities of the Lord, as they're authorized in the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, then a favorable condition will be created, the principles of religion in the world will be reestablished, and thus the executive heads who are so anxious to drive away corruption from the world will be successful. Nothing is bad if properly used for the service of the Lords. So the principle of Yukta Vairagya. So whatever is there can be used in the service of the Lord. So of course, I think so devotees are making best use of technology and trying to spread Krishna consciousness and trying to spread the transcendental sound vibration through so much of technology in this lockdown situations. So that's good. Text 7, important verse. Nanudveshti kalim samrat saranga iva sarabuk kushalanyashu siddhyanti netarani krutani yat Maharaj Parikshit was a realist, like the bees who only accept the essence of a flower. He knew perfectly well that in this age of Kali, auspicious things produce good effects immediately, whereas inauspicious acts must be actually performed to render effects. So he was never envious of the personality of Kali. Okay, somebody can read this purport, please.
The age of Kali is called fallen age. In this fallen age, because the living beings are in an awkward position, the Supreme Lord has given some special facilities to them. So, by the will of the Lord, a living being does not become a victim of sinful act until the act is actually performed. In other ages, simply by thinking of performing sinful act, one used to become a victim of that act. On the contrary, a living being in this age is awarded with the result of pious acts simply by thinking of them. Maharaj Parikshit, being the most learned and experienced king by the grace of the Lord, was not unnecessarily envious of the personality of Kali because he did not intend to give him any chance to perform any sinful act. He protected his subjects from falling prey to the sinful acts of the age of Kali. And at the same time, he gave full facility to the age of Kali by allotting him some particular places. At the end of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said that even though all nefarious activities of the personality of Kali are present, there is a great advantage in the age of Kali. One can attain salvation simply by chanting the holy name of the Lord. Thus, Maharaj Parikshit made an organized efforts to propagate the chanting of the Lord's holy name. And thus he saved the citizens from the clutches of Kali. It is for this advantage only that great sages sometimes wish all good for the age of Kali. In the Vedas also, it is said that by discourse on Lord Krishna's activities, one can get rid of all the disadvantages of the age of Kali. In the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is also said that by the recitation of Srimad Bhagavatam, the Supreme Lord becomes at once arrested within one's heart. These are some of the great advantages of the age of Kali. And Maharaj Parikshit took all the advantages and did not think any ill of the age of Kali, true to this Vaishnavite cult.
Mm. So here Maharaj Parikshit is exhibiting one of the Vaishnava qualities, and that is Saranga Ivasara book. One who takes the sar, the essence. So it said a Vaishnava is Saragrahi. He takes the essence. Srila Prabhupada quotes Chanakya Pandit, and he says that how one is ready to take gold even from a filthy place, and and one is ready to accept knowledge from even a person who may not be so much qualified, but he has learning. So so basically, a devotee is ready to accept the sar. He's ready to take the essence from any place, from anyone. If that person has something good to offer, then a Vaishnava is ready to accept that. And so that is Saranga. In the word-to-word meaning, Prabhupada writes Saranga as realist like the bees. So we know the famous example of the honeybee mentality and the housefly mentality. So the housefly even though there may be a beautiful garden of lotus flowers, but still will go to the place where there is some garbage. Whereas the honeybee, even if there's garbage, will go to one single flower that may be present there. That's the difference. And Srila Prabhupada explained, we must be like honeybees to accept the sar, to accept the essence. In the conditioned state, the tendency is to always be like the housefly and see the faults, see the defects, even in Vaishnavas. But the Shastra is saying, no, that's not the way, that should not be the vision while seeing a Vaishnav. And in that context, we have the famous verse from the 6th verse of the Nectar of Instruction, Upadeshamrit. Drishte svabhava janiteir vapushasya doshe na prakritatvam bhakta janasya pashet gangam basam khalo budbudafena panke brahma dravatvam apagachati nira dharmai. So Rupa Goswami is saying, Drishte svabhava. So everything depends on the drishti, everything depends on what's our perception. Also, the famous example that's given is the full moon. So there's a beautiful full moon. One could either appreciate the beautiful light of the full moon, or one could put one's drishti on the spots on the moon. It depends on us. Choice is ours. So similarly, Rupa Goswami is saying, as far as the devotees are concerned, na prakritatvam iha bhakta janasya pashet. Don't see the bhaktas, don't see the devotees with a material vision. And so don't see the vapushasya doshe. So don't see the bodily defects. So when we speak of bodily defects, it could be either gross body or subtle body. So bodily defects, gross body could be low birth, ugly, uneducated. So all those. And some defects could be on the subtle platform, like certain conditioning, certain habits, certain idiosyncrasies. Somebody is hot-tempered, somebody is too cold, somebody is a bit arrogant, somebody is a little slow, somebody is very fast. So we find so many varieties of all these conditionings which are coming from past lives. And we could put our focus light on those dosha, those faults of the Vaishnavas, and we could speak about them, we could write volumes about them, we could do all that. But then that's not Vaishnav. So therefore the example is being given of the Ganges, especially in the rainy season. So there could be so much of dirt and filth and grass. But one who understands the purifying potency of the Ganges just pushes them aside and takes bath anyways. And so therefore, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains, that the sara, or the most essential quality of a Vaishnava, is Krishna Eka Sharanam. That's the Swarup Lakshana of the Vaishnava. So the Vaishnava essentially has taken shelter of the Supreme Lord and is seriously practicing the various principles of devotional service, the various rules and regulations. Then we should not take the faults and discrepancies very seriously. And we understand that ultimately Krishna will purify them as long as one is strongly connected to devotional service. And so a Vaishnava is ready to take that essence, the wonderful qualities of the Vaishnava, and not focus on the faults. That's the quality of a Vaishnava. And that will help us have wonderful dealings with each other in the association of devotees, as we are all trying to be like honeybees to focus on the good qualities and the essence of a devotee, then we will always be in a mode of appreciating and glorifying the wonderful qualities of Vaishnavas. And with that, a conducive attitudes amongst devotees, there could be a wonderful association of devotees where everyone is inspired, encouraged to practice devotional service. That's the important quality and the important lesson that Parikshit Maharaj is showing through his own life as an exalted Vaishnav. And so Parikshit Maharaj was ready to see even good qualities in the most degraded age, Kali. He was ready to see good qualities. And what is that good quality? As Prabhupada is mentioning, that living being in this age is awarded with the results of pious acts simply by thinking of them. And he doesn't get the effects of sinful acts unless they're performed. So Maharaj Parikshit, he took that essence. And the other point is that even in this age of Kali, Kalir Doshanidhi Rajan Asti Eko Mahan Guna Kirtana Deva Krishna Simukta Sangha Param Rajit. So even though Kali Yuga is an ocean of faults, but still there is the great benediction of chanting the holy names, and simply by chanting the holy names, one can get liberation, one can get Krishna praying. And so that's what Maharaj Parikshit did. And that's how one could counteract the age of Kali, and in fact take advantage of this wonderful process of Harinam Sankirtan. And so therefore it's mentioned that actually even the denizens of heaven are eager to take birth in Kali Yuga, because simply by this easy process of Harinam Sankirtan, one can achieve the highest benediction of Krishna Prem. So one can take the essence, one can learn something good from anyone. In the life of Srila Prabhupada, we know the famous incident how initially Srila Prabhupada was distributing back to Godhead like a newspaper, and then somebody off the street just gave a suggestion that, Swamiji, it would be better if you write books. And then Prabhupada thought this is Krishna speaking through him. He took it seriously and brought out a magazine. So yes, if one is open to learn and take the essence from anyone and anything, then yes, Krishna could reveal so much through anyone and anything. It all depends on our perception. We also have the famous example of the Avadut Brahmana, both in the case of Prahlad Maharaj and in the case of King Yadu in the 7th canto, 11th canto. So there were these Avaduts simply lying on the side of the streets. Anyone would have just thought, use this person, lazy person. But then it takes one to know one. And so Prahlad Maharaj and these kings, because they themselves were so exalted, could recognize the exalted qualities of these apparently lazy people lying on the side of the road, and then they took advantage of their association. Okay, so text 8. Maharaj Parikshit considered that less intelligent men might find the personality of Kali to be very powerful, but that those who are self-controlled would have nothing to fear. The king was powerful like a tiger and took care for the foolish, careless persons. Okay, so Maharaj Parikshit, he took care because he was powerful and he knew how to protect his citizens from Kali. Text 9. O sages, as you did ask me, now I have described almost everything regarding the narrations about Lord Krishna in connection with the history of the pious Maharaj Parikshit. Okay, if you remember in the previous chapters, so when Sutta Goswami just mentioned how Maharaj Parikshit was, he saw the Shudra beating a cow and a bull, and he just punished them. So Sutta Goswami just said that, and then the sages said, if there is some relation to Krishna, Krishna Kathamritam, then please speak this in more detail. So now Sutta Goswami says, yes, I've spoken about that pastime. And then he finally says in text 10, those who are desirous of achieving complete perfection in life must submissively hear all topics that are connected with the transcendental activities and qualities of the personality of Godhead who acts wonderfully. So again here, the quality of hearing, submissive hearing, that's being mentioned. Prabhupada writes, systematic hearing means knowing him gradually in truth and facts. And this knowing him in truth and fact means attaining eternal life. Janma karma chunai devi. So in this way, Sutta Goswami said that yes, you had asked for the narrations about Parikshit Maharaj, and I have done that. So Sutta Goswami is saying, yes, I've done. So now the sages are speaking from the next verse. The good sages said, O brave Sutta Goswami, may you live many years and have eternal fame, for you are speaking very nicely about the activities of Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead. This is just like nectar for mortal beings like us. So the sages of Naimisharanya are glorifying Sutta Goswami that he's speaking very wonderfully. Again, we find this the reciprocation between the speaker and the hearers. So the speaker becomes enthused to speak depending upon the enthusiasm of the hearers. So if the audience are very enthusiastic to hear, then actually to satisfy or to reciprocate with the enthusiasm of the hearers, Krishna reciprocates in wonderful ways by wonderful revelations that come from the mouth of the speaker. So that's how Krishna reciprocates with an enthusiastic, submissive audience. So here, the sages of Naimisharanya are very happy and are glorifying Sutta Goswami that he is speaking nectar, martyanam amritam hina. So this is amritam. So Prabhupada ends this purport by saying, therefore, the more we hear about the transcendental activities of the Lord, as they are stated in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, the more we can know about his transcendental nature and thus make definite progress on the path back to Godhead. So the more we hear, the more we will understand. Text 12. We have just begun the performance of this fruitive activity, a sacrificial fire without certainty of its result due to the many imperfections in our action. Our bodies have become black from the smoke, but we are factually pleased by the nectar of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead Govinda, which you are distributing. So they're saying we have been performing this sacrifice in so many years, but this is not giving us any satisfaction. But the only thing what we have gained by the sacrifice, our faces have become black by the smoke, that's all. So karmakandi sacrifices. So we have not gained anything much, but the real nectar is what you are speaking about. Govinda Pada Padmas Madhu. So the madhu, the honey of the lotus feet of Govinda, that's the real nectar. So Prabhupada describes about the flaws of performing sacrifices in Kali Yuga. So this first flaw is that there is an acute scarcity of expert brahmanas able to carry out such performances successfully in this age of Kali. And similarly, performance of any kind of sacrifice in this age of Kali is also uncertain. Unscrupulous, greedy brahmanas of the age of Kali induce innocent public to such uncertain sacrificial shows without disclosing the scripture injunction that in the age of Kali, there's no fruitful sacrificial performance but the sacrifice of the congregation chanting of the holy name of the Lord. Next paragraph, the sages of Naimisharanya were practically sufferers from the smoke of a sacrificial fire and were doubtful about the result, but by hearing from a realized person like Sutta Goswami, they were fully satisfied. In the Brahma Vaivarta Puran, Vishnu tells Shiva that in the age of Kali, men full of anxieties of various kinds can vainly labor in fruitive activity and philosophical speculations. But when they're engaged in devotional service, the result is sure and certain, and there is no loss of energy. In other words, nothing performed for spiritual realization for material benefit can be successful without devotional service to the Lord. Right. So the main thing, especially in the stage of Kali, is the Harinam or Sankirtan Yajna. Next verse, so the sages of Naimisharanya they are saying that the real benefit that we are getting is hearing Krishna Katha from you, O Sutta Goswami. And so therefore in the next verse, they are glorifying the association of a pure devotee. Famous verse, Tulayama lavena pi na swargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kimutashisha. The value of a moment's association with the devotee of the Lord cannot be compared to the attainment of heavenly planets or liberation from matter, and what to speak of worldly benedictions in the form of material prosperity, which are for those who are meant for death. So Prabhupada writes, when there are similar points, it is possible to compare one thing to another. One cannot compare the association of pure devotee to anything material. So anything material like achieving heavenly planets, liberation, worldly benedictions, nothing can be compared to the association of a pure devotee. Further down he says, but the pure devotees of the Lord do not aspire after the happiness obtained in heavenly kingdom, nor do they aspire after liberation from material bondage. Okay, so Prabhupada often quoted Prabhupada Saraswati. Kevalyam narakayate tridashapur akasha pushpayate. So the pure devotees don't aspire for all this. So in other words, for the pure devotees of the Lord, the material pleasures obtainable in the heavenly planets are like phantasmagoria, and because they're all liberated from all material conceptions of pleasure and distress, they're factually liberated even in the material worlds. Yeah. So further down, almost towards the end, Prabhupada writes, Sutta Goswami was a pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his association with the rishis in Naimisharanya is unique. In the material world, association with gross materialists is veritably condemned. The materialist is called Yoshit Sangi, or one who is much attached to material entanglements. Women are the paraphernalia. Such attachment is conditioned because it drives away the benedictions of life and prosperity. And just the opposite is Bhagavat Sangi, or one who is always in the association with the Lord's name, form, qualities, etc. Such association is always desirable, it is worshipable, it is praiseworthy, and one may accept it as the highest goal of life. Okay, so the association of devotees is being glorified, and that's something which has been glorified throughout the scriptures. We find in the 4th canto, 4, 9, 11. So we find that Dhruva Maharaj is glorifying, or rather he is aspiring for the association of devotees where there is the constant nectarian flow of Krishna Katha. So Dhruva Maharaj, even though he's having darshan directly of the Supreme Lord, that's the prayer, that's the benediction he's asking for, to be in the association of devotees where there is always Krishna Katha, where there is always devotional service that's happening. So that's the aspiration of a devotee. And Srila Prabhupada writes in that purport a very important point. And he says that for that purpose of association of devotees, we have created this ISKCON society. And then he says, anyone who thinks he can practice devotional service outside this society, that is ISKCON society, is simply living in a hallucination. It is impossible. So anyone who thinks he can practice devotional service outside ISKCON, Prabhupada says, impossible. Prabhupada's words. And so therefore, we should take a note of this point, that we are very fortunate to have the wonderful association of devotees and so many facilities to practice devotional service given mercifully by Srila Prabhupada. And so therefore, we should be grateful, and we should remain within this international society and practice devotional service, understanding that here we have the wonderful association of so many pure devotees, and so we are greatly benedicted by that. Text 14. The personality of Godhead Lord Krishna, Govinda, is the exclusive shelter for all great living beings, and his transcendental attributes cannot even be measured by such masters of mystic powers as Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma. Can anyone who's expert in relishing nectar, rasa, ever be fully satiated by hearing topics about him? So here the sages of Naimisharanya. So in the previous verse, they glorified the association of pure devotees, and now they're glorifying Krishna Katha. That who will be that person who will ever be satiated fully by hearing topics of, means a devotee is always eager, always anxious to hear more and more about the topics of the Supreme Lord. So Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma are two chief of the demigods. And so further down, Prabhupada writes that Brahma is counted amongst the living beings, but he's the greatest of all of us. And why is the greatest of all living beings so much attached to the transcendental topics of Lord Krishna? Because he is the reservoir of all enjoyment. He is Rasavit. The Supreme Lord is described as Rasavit or Rasabihari. He is, so basically he is expert in relishing mellows, relishing rasas, Rasavit. So therefore, even great personalities like Brahma and Shiva are eager to hear about him. Towards the end, Prabhupada writes, there is no end to such transcendental discourses. In mundane affairs, there is a law of cessation. But in transcendence, there is no such cessation. Sutta Goswami desired to continue the topics of Lord Krishna before the sages from Naimisharanya, and the sages also expressed their readiness to hear from him continuously. Since the Lord is transcendence and his attributes are transcendental, such discourses increase the receptive mood of the purified audience. So by hearing, one increases the taste. So that's the way to increase the taste. As we know again, Upadeshamrit text 7, Syat Krishna Nama Charitadi Sitapi Vidya Pitto Patapta Rasanasya Narochikano Kendvadaratanu Dinam Satkalu Seva Jishta Swadvi Kramad Bhavati Tat Kadamulahantri. So we know the famous analogy of the jaundice patient who's finding sugar candy bitter, but then the remedy is to continue to take sugar candy. As he continues to take it, will be sweet. He will taste it sweet. So similarly, now we may not have taste for Krishna Katha, but then if the audience is in a receptive mood, then if one continues to hear, what is that? So Sat Krishna Nama Charitadi Sudha Pitto Kintu Adarat Anudinam. Adarat means with great respect, with great attention. That's meaning of being receptive. So when one thinks something is important, then one will be in a receptive mood. So just like Krishna Katha is going on, if we think it is not important, then okay, one will do it superficially. But when one knows that it's important, then one will be in that receptive mood. So if a guest comes to the house, if one knows the guest is important, one will be in a receptive mood. So if one has that receptive mood, adarat and anudinam, every day, if one continues to hear, even though one may not have so much taste, then the taste will increase. And then as the taste increases, then there'll be no satiation. One will never feel bored. One will never feel I had enough, but rather one wants to hear more and more and more. So that's the nature of Krishna and Krishna Katha, or anything in relation to Krishna, because Nava Yovanam, newer and newer realizations, every time one comes in contact with Krishna. So therefore, then there is no question of boredom. But it all depends on what is the quality of hearing, what is the quality of devotional service. In that connection, there's a wonderful purport in the 4th canto. You can look it up later. 4th canto, 20th chapter, verse number 30. 4:20:30. There also Srila Prabhupada explains that how because Krishna is Navayovanam, ever new, ever fresh. So the Paramatma actually, he gives those newer and newer realizations when one has that sincerity of practice, when one is eager to hear, then Krishna as the Paramatma, he gives those new and new realizations. And then there is no question of becoming hackneyed or boring, not only in terms of hearing Krishna Katha, but in terms of any type of devotional service. Not that after a few years we become bored. If that's the symptom, then that means there is some problem in our attitudes of performing that service. If one is in that proper service attitudes, then how many ever years may pass, but it's all the time ever fresh, ever new, never hackneyed, boring. Because Krishna as the Paramatma is giving newer and newer realizations every time one hears, every time one performs that service. So then there is no satiation. So here the sages of Naimisharanya are saying, no, we are not satisfied. We want to hear more and more. Text 15. O Sutta Goswami, you are a learned and pure devotee of the Lord, because the personality of Godhead is your chief object of service. Therefore, please describe to us the pastimes of the Lord, which are above all material conception, for we are anxious to receive such messages. Charitam Vishuddham Shushrushatam. Shushrushatam. So the sages are saying we are very eager to hear these Vishuddham, transcendental topics about the Lord. So here, Prabhupada is speaking about the qualification of the speaker, as it said about Sutta Goswami here. He was a pure devotee. He was Pradhana Mahattama. And so he was pure devotee of the Lord, the great Mahattama. So therefore, he is Vidwan, learned. So Prabhupada writes, the speaker on the transcendental activities of the Lord should have only one object of worship and service, Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the audience for such topics should be anxious to hear about him. When such a combination is possible, namely a qualified speaker and a qualified audience, it is then and there very much congenial to continue discourses on transcendence. So the speaker should essentially be a devotee, and the audience should be very eager to hear. Then that's a good combination. That's obviously not possible when they're professional speakers and a materially absorbed audience. And so he says, but the discourses between the saints of Naimisharanya and Sri Sutta Goswami are on the transcendental level. There is no motive for material gain. In such discourses, unlimited transcendental pleasure is relished, both by the audience and by the speaker, and therefore they can continue the topics for many thousands of years. Now, Bhagavad Saptas are held for 7 days only, and after finishing the show, both the audience and speaker become engaged in material activities as usual. They can do so because speaker is not Bhagavad Pradhan and the audience is not Shushrushatam, as explained above. So, those are the qualifications for the speaker and the audience. Then there is unlimited transcendental pleasure, both for the speaker as well as the audience. And so therefore, we must try and cultivate these qualifications as speakers and audience. then both will have benefits. Then there will be so much of transcendental pleasure. So if either the audience or the speaker have material motives for material gain, if there is that contamination, then there won't be so much of transcendental pleasure. But to the degree, so the responsibility is both individually and collectively. So individually, we can try to cultivate that right consciousness, whether we are speakers or whether we are in the audience. And when we are trying to cultivate that right type of consciousness, then we will derive the benefits. Then we will be experiencing that great transcendental pleasure. Matchitta madgata prana bodhayanta parasparam katayantascha mam nityam tushyanti cha ramanti cha. So when the Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, that's what this verse is speaking about, Matchitta madgata prana. So when all of them are performed with the right motive, simply for the pleasure of the Lord and the Vaishnavas, then Katayantascha mamne tushyanti cha ramanti cha. Then one becomes totally satisfied and one is in bliss. Because Krishna manifests in that Krishna Katha. And when Krishna manifests, then everyone is transcendently elevated, inspired, enthused. No one feels bored because Krishna manifests in such Krishna Katha where there are no material motives. So therefore, cultivating that right type of consciousness in our devotional service is very important for us to experience that great satisfaction and relish in the practices of a devotional service. When there are material motives in practices of a devotional service, when there is that contamination, then we won't be able to experience that transcendental happiness. Then devotional service becomes hackneyed, boring, then there are problems. But to the degree we are trying to practice devotional service on the pure, unmotivated platform, to that degree we can experience that transcendental bliss because Krishna manifests in that service. And then, as Prabhupada writes here, we can continue that service for thousands of years. O Sutta Goswami, text 16, please describe those topics of the Lord by which Maharaj Parikshit, whose intelligence was fixed on liberation, attained the lotus feet of the Lord, who is the shelter of Garuda, king of birds. Those topics were vibrated by the son of Vyas, Srila Shukadev. Okay, so the sages of Naimisharanya glorifying the Supreme Lord and his transcendental pastimes and the association of devotees. So they have that opportunity now. They have the pure devotee Sutta Goswami, and they're all very eager to hear Krishna Katha. And so therefore they're requesting Sutta Goswami to describe more of the pastimes of the Supreme Lord and his devotee, that's Parikshit Maharaj, and how he attained the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Prabhupada speaks about the impersonalists and then devotees, and then three classes of devotees, Prakrita, Madhyam, and Mahabhagavat. So we know all that. These topics have been discussed many times as both nectar of instruction and nectar of devotion. So in the second paragraph, Prabhupada writes, so there are many instances in the transcendental histories of the world of an impersonalist who has later become a devotee. But a devotee has never become an impersonalist. This very fact proves that on the transcendental steps, the step occupied by devotee is higher than the step occupied by an impersonalist. And then he's quoting 12.5 Kleshodikata Station. Okay. Fine. So text 17, thus, please narrate to us the narrations of the unlimited, for their purifying and supreme. They were spoken to Maharaj Parikshit, and they're very dear to the pure devotees, being full of bhakti yoga. So in this way, the sages of Naimisharanya have requested Sutta Goswami to speak topics about the Supreme Lord and Maharaj Parikshit, and how Maharaj Parikshit attained the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. And so now Sutta Goswami begins to speak. Text 18. Sri Sutta Goswami said, O God, although we are born in a mixed caste, we are still promoted in birthright simply by serving and following the great who are advanced in knowledge. Even by conversing with such great souls, one can without delay cleanse oneself of all disqualifications resulting from lower births. So, Sutta Goswami, having been requested to speak further on Krishna Katha, what's important to note is the attitude of Sutta Goswami. Throughout the Bhagavatam, we not only learn philosophy, but we also learn the culture of Krishna consciousness. As Srila Prabhupada put it right in the preface, that the Srimad Bhagavatam is a cultural presentation for the re-spiritualization of the entire society. It's a cultural presentation. And so therefore, as we are going through the Srimad Bhagavatam, not only we should try to understand the philosophy, but also understand the culture of Vaishnavism. And that a culture is very important to create that conducive environment to really accept and digest the philosophy. As we have been discussing in our previous discussions, that many people may know the philosophy and speak the philosophy very eloquently, but unless there is the support of culture and practice, others will not be inspired to take it up. And so one of the main reasons why so many people got attracted to Srila Prabhupada is because Srila Prabhupada was not only just speaking, what he was speaking in the early days was not so much understood. But then they saw the culture, they saw the etiquettes, they saw the behavior, they saw the exemplary behavior, they saw that. And that was what attracted so many people to Srila Prabhupada. And so throughout the Bhagavatam also we find that culture. So when Sutta Goswami is being requested to speak, Sutta Goswami is not thinking, oh, they have recognized me as the great authority on the Bhagavatam. No. The immediate response is that actually I'm not qualified. I am not qualified. So we see the immediate mode of humility. And as we have been discussing, it is that humility, that submissive mood, which actually attracts the grace. Again, in the life of Srila Prabhupada, in the Markini Bhagavad Dharma. So Srila Prabhupada is saying, I have no qualification. I have the title of Bhakti Vedanta. I have no Bhakti, I have no study of Vedanta, nothing. Nothing. You simply make me a puppet, make me dance. Again, Prabhupada writes in the Nectar of Devotion, right in the introduction. He says, the attitude of all the preachers within this Krishna consciousness movement should be that they are simply an instrument in the hands of the previous acharyas. So again, we find this mood of humility. So one understands that, yes, I'm totally unqualified, but by grace, by mercy, somehow I have been given this service. So that's the mood here of Sutta Goswami also. So he's saying that although although api viloma jataha, I've been born in a mixed caste, Sutta caste. So Anuloma and Viloma. So Prabhupada explains that even in Krishna book. So Anuloma means when there is the man is of higher caste, the girl is of lower caste. That's Anuloma. Viloma means the other way around. Man is of lower caste, woman of high caste. So Sutta Goswami says he is Viloma Jata. Viloma Jata. So in one sense, he is Daush Kulyam. He is disqualified by birth. But still, it has been possible for him to rise up. Why? Because he associated with those who are Vriddha Anuvritya. Vriddha Anuvritya. So Anuvritya means serving. So he served. He served those who are Vriddha. Prabhupada explains in other purports. Vriddha means olds, can be of two types. One is Vriddha by age and the other is Vriddha by knowledge and experience. So by serving those who are Vriddha, and in this context, as Prabhupada says, those are advanced in knowledge, then Sutta Goswami, he says, Shigram, very soon he became qualified. And so, of course, we find throughout the Bhagavatam how even those who may be apparently disqualified, second canto, Kirato, Hunandra, Pulinda, Pulkasha, Yad apashraya ashrayaha, by taking shelter of those who have taken shelter, Shuddhyanti, they can be purified. And then also in the third canto, we have that famous verse that even though one may be born in a Chandala family. So throughout the Shastras, we see these quotes and examples of how even though one may be born in a low family, but if one takes to the process of devotional service, surrenders to the devotees, then it is possible for one to be purified. Therefore, Prabhupada ends the first paragraph by saying, he clearly stated that any man, whatever he may be, whether Brahmana, Shudra by birth, or a householder, or mendicant in the order of society, is conversant with the science of Krishna, can be accepted as an acharya or guru. So we know this famous verse of Mahaprabhu. Kiba Vipra, Kibanyasi, Shudra Kineno, Ye Krishna Tattvaveta, say Guru Hoy. So Sutta Goswami, he learned the science of Krishna from great rishis and authorities like Shukadev and Vyasadev. And he was so qualified that even the sages of Naimisharanya eagerly wanted to hear from him the science of Krishna in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam. So he had the double association of great souls by hearing and preaching. Okay, so preaching also gives us an opportunity to associate with those to whom we are preaching. So, and the next sentence he says, transcendental science or the science of Krishna has to be learned from the authorities, and when one preaches the science, he becomes still more qualified. Prabhupada wrote that in the first chapter also, when he was discussing the qualities of Sutta Goswami. There also he mentions that hearing and explaining is more important than just reading. Hopefully you recollect that statement Prabhupada writes there. So can somebody explain why this is so? How does preaching help? How does preaching help one to become more qualified? Yes, any thoughts?
Because preaching is kirtanam also.
Yes.
And also it comes under friendly activities or sakhyam also sometimes it is explained.
Okay, that's a good point. Yes, it's definitely kirtanam. That's correct. Somebody else?
Prabhuji, when we are glorifying the Lord, first actually it's our purification happening, and then we are glorifying the Lord. So we are getting purified also, and plus we are, giving the message also.
Okay, good point. Yes, we're becoming purified. What else?
Guruji,
If we don't
Tirupati
understand
Chintamani,
it deeply,
his
we cannot preach.
Maharaj tells
First,
about
we
the
have to
culture.
understand it.
There are two people speaking. So one person, please.
We have to first understand, only then we can preach. So first, when we understand it, then we become perfect, and then only we can preach.
Okay, that's correct. First, we have to understand, then we can preach. That's correct. The question is, of course, what's the advantage of preaching in becoming more qualified? Yes, somebody else was saying.
Yeah, Guruji, so there in that book, Shivaram Sai Maharaj mentioned that watering the seed, so
Hmm.
that includes even the preaching also. That is a part of that. It's like part of watering the seed.
Okay, yes, Shravanam and Kirtanam. So Kirtanam is, yes, preaching. Yes, that's correct. What else? There's one important point.
Correct. When we are preaching, then naturally we are forced to follow, because we cannot.
Yes. Hmm.
So that's
Because?
that become because we cannot we cannot uh, speak and which we don't follow. So other side.
Yes, that will be difficult. Correct. So yes, so we'll be more inspired. We'll be more inspired to practice, to follow properly when we are preaching. So that we also discussed that point in one previous, in a quote of Srila Prabhupada, we saw Prabhupada says that to the degree one is actually following, practicing, then our preaching will be effective. So yes, so we'll be inspired to practice. Anything more?
Prabhuji, it is very dear to Krishna, showing the compassion to other living entities. So since it is dear to Krishna and Guru, it is actually more purifying.
Yes, more purifying. And then when we preach, so when Krishna is pleased, then the result will be we will get many wonderful realizations by preaching. Realizations are a gift of Krishna by Krishna's grace. So when Krishna is pleased, then one is benedicted with wonderful realizations, which will help one progress in devotional service and become more qualified, besides all the other points that all of you have said. Yes. So Sutta Goswami had both the advantages, and thus undoubtedly was completely freed from all disqualifications of low birth and mental agonies. So this verse definitely proves that Sri Shukadeva Goswami did not refuse to teach Sutta Goswami about the transcendental science, nor did the sages of Naimisharanya refuse to hear lessons from him because of his inferior birth. So birth is no qualification. Prabhupada is giving example of Haridas Thakur. And then the next paragraph is, such is the power of pure devotees of the Lord. The Ganges water is accepted as pure, one can become purified after taking bath in water of the Ganges. But as far as the great devotees of the Lord are concerned, they can purify a degraded soul even by being seen by the low-born, and what to speak of association. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to purify the whole atmosphere of the polluted world by sending qualified preachers out of the world, and remains with the Indians to take up this task scientifically and thus do the best kind of humanitarian work. Okay, so Sutta Goswami is saying that yes, although I was born in low family, but then by the association of Shukadeva Goswami and the sages of Naimisharanya, I become qualified to speak. Text 19. And what to speak of those who are under the direction of great devotees, chanting the holy name of the Unlimited, who has unlimited potency. The personality of Godhead, unlimited in potency and transcendental by attributes, is called the Ananta. So Prabhupada writes, Srimad Bhagavatam asserts that one who chants the holy name of the Lord under the direction of a pure devotee can at once get free from the disadvantages due to a lower caste birth. The pure devotee of the Lord doesn't commit any offense while chanting the holy name of the Lord. Okay, so that inoffensive chanting is what is important. And so when one takes direction from such devotees who are offenselessly chanting, then one becomes empowered. So towards the end, Prabhupada says, the chanting of the holy name of the Lord can undoubtedly deliver one from the disadvantages of a lower caste birth. Since the devotee is so charged with the potency of the Lord, even fractionally, the disqualification due to lower birth cannot stand in the way. So there can be no material disqualifications in the practice of devotional service. Text 20. It is now ascertained that he, the personality of Godhead, is unlimited and there is none equal to him. Consequently, no one can speak of him adequately. Great demigods cannot obtain the favor of the goddess of fortune even by prayers, but this very goddess renders service unto the Lord, although he is unwilling to have such service. So he's glorifying. So Sutta Goswami is basically glorifying he's glorifying the Vaishnavas. So by their grace, even though one is unqualified, one can become qualified. And now he's glorifying the Supreme Lords. So how the goddess of fortune, she renders service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although he has nothing to accept from her. So Prabhupada explains in another place also that how all the Lakshmis, even though there is no dust in Vaikuntha, but still they are sweeping somehow to attract the mercy of the Supreme Lords. Okay, text 21. Who can be worthy of the name of the Supreme Lord but the personality of God is Sri Krishna? Brahmaji collected the water emanating from the nails of his feet in order to award it to Lord Shiva as a worshipful welcome. This very water, the Ganges, is purifying the whole universe, including Lord Shiva. So in this way is glorifying the Supreme Lord, that how the Supreme Lord is so purifying, how the Ganges is purifying because it's coming from the lotus feet of the Supreme Lords. So Prabhupada writes, the goddess of fortune Lakshmi and all powerful demigods like Brahma and Shiva are engaged in the worship of Vishnu or Lord Krishna. Therefore, who can be more powerful than Mukunda, Lord Krishna, to be factually called the Supreme Personality of Godhead? The goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Ji, Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva are not independently powerful. They are powerful as expansions of the Supreme Lord, and all of them are engaged in the transcendent loving service of the Lord, and so also are the living entities. And then he talks about the four sampradayas. Text 22. Self-controlled persons who are attached to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna can all of a sudden give up the world of mental attachment, including the gross body and subtle mind, and go away to attain the highest perfection of the renounced order of life by which non-violence and renunciation are consequential. Now he's speaking about the result of taking shelter of such a Supreme Lord. So previous two verses, he glorified the Supreme Lord, how he is so great that even Brahma, Shiva, and Goddess Lakshmi, even they are wanting to attract the favor of the Supreme Lord. And now in this verse, he's talking about what is the result of becoming attached, of surrendering to the Supreme Lord. So then one loses all mental attachments, and then one develops all these qualities like non-violence and renunciation. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janyatya Ashu Vairagyam Dhyanam Chayad Ahitukam. So these are the qualities that develop by taking shelter of the Supreme Lords. So almost a little halfway down the purport, Prabhupada gives a list of various good qualities that develop by practice of devotional service. And he says, all these godly qualities exist in the devotee of the Lord spontaneously. Such Paramahamsas who are completely given up to the service of the Lord are very rare. They are very rare even amongst the liberated souls. Real nonviolence means freedom from envy. In this world, everyone is envious of his fellow being, but a perfect Paramahamsa being completely given up to the service of the Lord is perfectly non-envious. 23. O Rishis who are as powerfully pure as the sun, I shall try to describe to you the transcendental pastimes of Vishnu as far as my knowledge is concerned. As the birds fly in the sky as far as the capacity allows, so do the learned devotees describe the Lord as far as their realization allows. And so a similar verse was also there before towards the end of the 3rd chapter. There also it was said a similar verse. Yataditam yatamati. As far as my intelligence and realization goes, I will describe. And so here also, Sutta Goswami is saying, giving the example of the birds. So as far as my realization goes, Atma Avagama, as far as my knowledge is concerned. So again, we find that Sutta Goswami is not claiming himself to be a very great personality, knowing everything. No, he's saying, well, as far as my realization goes, as far as my knowledge goes, that much I will describe. And Prabhupada is explaining why. Because the Supreme Absolute Truth is unlimited. No living being can know about the unlimited by his limited capacity. So the Supreme Lord is unlimited. So no one can say, I know everything. So Prabhupada says, of course, even the Supreme Lord doesn't know everything about himself. What to speak of anyone else? So therefore, no one can be proud like that. Now I'm going to describe everything. No. So according to one's own realization. So towards the end, Prabhupada, right? So Srila Sutta Goswami has rightly taken this position in describing the pastimes of the Lord as far as he has realized. Factually, only the Lord himself can describe himself, and his learned devotee also can describe him as far as the Lord gives him the power of description. And that is why we find even Shukadeva Goswami, this will come in the second canto, even Shukadeva Goswami, when was asked questions by Parikshit Maharaj, first of all, Shukadeva Goswami offers a series of prayers to the Supreme Lord before he actually begins to answer Parikshit Maharaj's question. Because again, the same point, I can't understand, I don't know. So I'm dependent on the Lord to get that knowledge to speak. And so therefore we find these great personalities dependent on the Lord's mercy. And then they're empowered. So here also Sutta Goswami is feeling that dependence on the Lord. He says, I have some limited realization. So here also we find, first of all, Sutta Goswami, when asked by the sages to describe more of the pastimes of the Lord and his devotees. So first of all, he glorifies the devotees, he glorifies the Lord, and then he begins the description from the next verse onwards. So text 24-25. So this is the well-known pastime of Parikshit Maharaj. So as far as the pastime goes, most of us are aware. So we will try to learn some important lessons from Prabhupada's purpose. Text 24-25. Once upon a time, Maharaj Parikshit, while engaged in hunting in the forest with bow and arrows, became extremely fatigued, hungry and thirsty while following the stags. While searching for a reservoir of water, he entered the hermitage of the well-known Shamik Rishi and saw the sage sitting silently with closed eyes. So Prabhupada, right in the beginning, he clarifies the situation of Parikshit Maharaj. And he does that at quite a few places. But right in the beginning of the pastime, he clarifies the position of Parikshit Maharaj. And he says, the Supreme Lord is so kind to his pure devotees that in proper time he calls such devotees up to him and thus creates an auspicious circumstance for the devotee. Maharaj Parikshit was a pure devotee of the Lord, and there was no reason for him to become extremely fatigued, hungry, and thirsty, because a devotee of the Lord never becomes perturbed by such bodily demands. But by the desire of the Lord, even such a devotee can become apparently fatigued and thirsty, just to create a situation favorable for his renunciation of worldly activities. One has to give up all attachment for worldly relations before one is able to go back to Godhead. And thus, when a devotee is too much absorbed in worldly affairs, the Lord creates a situation to cause indifference. The Supreme Lord never forgets his pure devotee, even though he may be engaged in so-called worldly affairs. Sometimes he creates an awkward situation and the devotee becomes obliged to renounce all worldly affairs. The devotee can understand by the signal of the Lord, but others take it to be unfavorable and frustrating. Maharaj Parikshit was to become the medium for the revelation of Srimad Bhagavatam by Lord Sri Krishna, as his grandfather Arjuna was the medium for the Bhagavad Gita. Had Arjuna not been taken up with an illusion of family affection by the will of the Lord, the Bhagavad Gita would not have been spoken by the Lord himself for the good of all concerned. Similarly, had Maharaj Parikshit not been fatigued, hungry and thirsty at this time, Srimad Bhagavatam would not have been spoken by Srila Shukadeva Goswami, the prime authority of Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is a prelude to the circumstances under which Srimad Bhagavatam is spoken for the benefit of all concerned. The prelude therefore begins with the words, once upon a time. Okay, so right in the beginning, Srila Prabhupada is clarifying that this entire pastime is orchestrated by the will of the Lord. Otherwise, an exalted personality like Maharaj Parikshit could not be a victim of hunger and thirst. And so it's the Supreme Lord who sometimes puts the devotee in awkward situations for the best benefit of the devotee and the world. Okay, so can we have some more examples of the Lord putting devotees in awkward situations for some higher purpose?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
We have the example of Bhismadev. By the will of the Lord, he was fighting on the side of Adharma. So,
why?
Because Lord wanted to set that even a personality as great as Bhismadev will be defeated if is not on the side of Dharma.
Okay, good point. Good example. Somebody else?
There's example. We also hear that how Duryodhana, when he insulted Vidurji, it was a very heavy insult, and he was out actually, out of that whole scene. But the Vidura took it as the mercy of the Lord, and he actually then eventually met Maitreya Muni and got benefited there.
Yes. So we read there that how Vidura, he accepted Mahamaya as Yogamaya. So Duryodhana's words were influenced by Mahamaya, but Vidura took it as Yogamaya, the transcendental arrangement of the Lord, and therefore he left on pilgrimage. Yes.
Prabhuji,
Okay,
can we give example of Bali Maharaj also, that actually for a higher purpose, though actually Bali Maharaj knew he was Vaman Dev, but then he took the 3 steps, and Bali Maharaj's Atma Nivedan happened only because the Lord took away everything from him.
Yes, of course. Lord wanted to perform his pastimes, and so we could say that, yes.
When Narad Muni's mother was bitten by a snake, was left all alone, he took it as will of Lord and went towards north.
Okay, good example, yes. Few more.
Ambrish Maharaj, when he was put in the awkward situation of how to break the fast, and then when Durvasa Muni, showed his anger on him, he just simply folded the hands and just accepted it as the mercy of the Lord.
Okay, so can we say that the circumstances were orchestrated by the Lord?
Not orchestrated by the Lord. Yeah.
Yes, but in any case, the Lord also wants to glorify his pure devotees. So maybe we could say that the Lord wanted to glorify Ambrish Maharaj. Possible. But good. That's a good example. Okay, fine. Somebody else?
King Chitraketu.
Yes, King Chitraketu. What happened?
He laughed at Shiva when he was preaching, and Lakshmi or Parvati was on his left. And Mother Parvati cursed him. And the Prabhupada mentioned specifically that he wanted Chitraketu to come back to his.
Yes, that's right. So that's a good example. Thank you, Prabhu. That, yes, Chitraketu Maharaj being cursed by Mother Parvati, that was definitely orchestrated by the Lord for Chitraketu Maharaj to come back to the spiritual worlds early. Some other examples?
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Lord Nityanand Prabhu, Advaita Acharya Prabhu. And actually Advaita Acharya Prabhu kicked on the chest of, Nityanand, Lord Nityanand Prabhu.
Kicked on the chest of?
Shivanand Sen.
Yes, yes, Shivanand Sen, correct. Then?
He took it as mercy of the Lord Nityanand Prabhu.
Okay, that's right. Shivananda Sen took it as mercy of Nityanand Prabhu. That's right. He was in ecstasy, of course. His wife was miserable, but there are one or two prominent examples.
Anga.
Yes, that's correct. Maharaj Anga. When?
His son Veena was very, very cruel. He tried to reform him. And then he thought that this must be the arrangement of the Lord to take him back and make him advance.
Yes, that's right. So Maharaj Anga took his son's nonsensical activities as the Lord's indication, and he left home. Yes. And of course, we have an example of Srila Prabhupada himself when his business collapsed and burnt. And so then again, Srila Prabhupada took it as the Lord's mercy to give up on his material attachments. So that was, of course, definitely, again, orchestrated by the Lord so that Srila Prabhupada could actually spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. So yes, so we have all these wonderful examples where the Lord orchestrates events in the lives of devotees. So somebody may ask a question. So when we are put in some awkward situations or difficulties, then how do we know whether it is orchestrated by the Lord or it's our own karma or how do we know?
If we are going close to Lord and His service in that circumstances, then definitely it is a special favor of the Lord. Many times we have experienced that something happens and then no, but in that circumstances we go close to the Lord. We eventually.
Okay, but then sometimes it does happen. Awkward circumstances. Somebody may think, "Oh, why this is happening," and things like that. So one may take it in a negative way also.
Okay.
But can we consult some senior devotees also? Whether it is senior devotees can see more better. Because many times when we discuss, senior devotees say, "Oh, it is orchestrated by the Lord. You're having so
right."
much."
So ultimately, yes. So we could be bewildered, and so therefore we require superior guidance. Yes. Okay. So now we'll proceed ahead. Text 26. So Parikshit Maharaj has come to the ashram of Shamik Rishi. Text 26. The Muni's sense organs, breath, mind, and intelligence were all restrained from mental activities, and he was situated in a trance apart from three: wakefulness, dream, unconsciousness. So we know those various states of consciousness, having achieved a transcendental position qualitatively equal with the supreme absolutes. Okay, so he was in trance, totally meditating on the Supreme Lord. Text 27. The sage in meditation was covered by the skin of a stag, and long compressed hair was scattered all over him. The king whose palate was dry from thirst asked him for water. You find throughout this pastime, Prabhupada again and again gives reminders that this is not normal for Maharaj Parikshit. This was orchestrated by the Lord. So many times Prabhupada actually mentions in these purports. So here also he mentions that such a great devotee and king asked for water from a sage absorbed in trance was certainly providential. Otherwise, there was no chance of such a unique happening. Maharaj Parikshit was thus placed in an awkward position so that gradually Srimad Bhagavatam could be revealed. 28. The king, not received by any formal welcome by means of being offered a seat, place, water, and sweet addresses, considered himself neglected, and so thinking, he became angry. So the verse is saying, what are the different ways of welcoming guests? So at least one should offer a seat, a place, water, or sweet address. Something should be there, but nothing was there in the case of Maharaj Parikshit. So Prabhupada also, Prabhupada says, first line, the law of reception in the codes of Vedic principles states that even if an enemy is received at home, he must be received with all respects. He should not be given a chance to understand that he has come into the house of an enemy. And this is Vedic etiquette, that even if an enemy comes, one should be well received. So Prabhupada is giving examples of Arjuna and Bhima and Krishna, of course, they went to Jarasan. And then we also hear about how when Arjuna went to Duryodhan in the midst of the war, and even Duryodhan welcomes Arjuna. And he says that that was the law of reception. The reception law enjoins that a poor man who has nothing to offer his guests should be good enough to offer a straw mat for sitting, glass of water for drinking, some sweet words. Therefore, to receive a guest, either friend or foe, there is no expense. It's only a question of good manners. Okay, so some etiquette. Again, in this purport, Prabhupada again makes the point. To become, as a matter of fact, the king was right to get angry with the rishi when he needed a glass of water very badly. To become angry in such a grave situation was not unnatural for the king. But because the king himself was not less than a great saint, his becoming angry and taking action were astonishing. So it must be accepted that it was so ordained by the supreme will of the Lord. The king was a great devotee of the Lord, and the saint was also as good as the king. But by the will of the Lord, the circumstances were so created that they became ways to the king's becoming unattached to family connection, committal activities, and thus become completely surrendered soul in Lord's feet. So again and again, Prabhupada repeats this point, just so that there is no misunderstanding about the character of Maharaj Parikshit. And again, Prabhupada writes towards the end, the merciful Lord sometimes creates such awkward positions for his pure devotees in order to drag them towards himself from the mire of material existence. In fact, Prabhupada used the same words in the case of Narada boy when he lost his mother. So there also Prabhupada writes, this is the way of the Lord's dragging a sincere soul towards him. Something like that Prabhupada writes over there also. But outwardly, the situations appear to be frustrating to the devotees. So that's outwardly, externally. The devotees of the Lord are always under the protection of the Lord, and in any condition, frustration or success, the Lord is the supreme guide for the devotees. The pure devotees therefore accept all conditions of frustration as blessings from the Lord. O Brahmanas, the king's anger and envy directed towards the Brahmana sage were unprecedented, being that circumstances had made him hungry and thirsty. So again, Prabhupada in this purport, he makes the point. For a king like Maharaj Parikshit to become angry and envious, especially at a sage and Brahmana, was undoubtedly unprecedented. The last line, the only justification for Maharaj Parikshit's behavior is that it was ordained by the Lord. So you see so many places, and it's going to come again in the further verses. Text 30. While leaving, the king, being so insulted, picked up a lifeless snake with his bow and angrily placed it on the shoulder of the sage. Then he returned to his palace. Purport. The king thus treated the sage tit for tat, although he was never accustomed to such silly actions. So the sage didn't respect, so therefore the king also disrespected. So that's called tit for tat. You do something wrong, I do something wrong. So of course that type of behavior is not expected of a great devotee. Devotees are supposed to be titikshva karmika. So devotees are supposed to be more tolerant and they don't unnecessarily take revenge. Prabhupada writes in Bhagavad Gita, 12th chapter, verses 13 and 14, purport. Prabhupada writes there, a devotee does not become his enemy's enemy. Important points. So if somebody is inimical to a devotee, it is not that the devotee also becomes inimical towards them. So the devotee just tolerates. There is that well-known pastime of Gopal Krishna Maharaj in the early days getting one Bengali person to speak to Srila Prabhupada in Canada. And the man, he spoke something quite critical to Srila Prabhupada. And Gopal Krishna Maharaj was feeling uneasy and bad that he got this new person and he was criticizing Srila Prabhupada. Then Prabhupada just said, oh, maybe in the previous life I did something, so it's okay. So that's a devotee usually. So he doesn't take it very seriously. But here, the king did that, tit for tat. He never usually would do such silly actions. Again, Prabhupada says, by the will of the Lord. So it's all happening by the will of the Lord. This was certainly unprecedented. It so happened by the will of the Lord. Just in the short purport, Prabhupada writes it 2 times, the will of the Lord. So you see, practically in every purport, Prabhupada is making this point. So Prabhupada wants to really glorify Parikshit Maharaj. So therefore he's repeating the point again and again. Text 31. Upon returning, he began to contemplate and argue within himself whether the sage had actually been in meditation with senses concentrated and eyes closed, or whether he had just been feigned trance just to avoid receiving a lower Kshatriya. So Parikshit Maharaj, because he was a great devotee, so the devotee is always contemplative. And so Maharaj Parikshit is wondering, did I do the right thing or not? Was the sage really in trance, or whether he was pretending to be in trance? Did I do the right thing? So that's a devotee. So devotee doesn't do things whimsically, carelessly. So even if the devotee does something, then he's always thinking, did I do the right thing? Did I do something wrong? Where can I improve? And Prabhupada, then in one instance, when a devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, practically, what is the meaning of humility? Prabhupada says, in that instance, Prabhupada says, humility means always thinking how I can improve. So devotee never thinks, I'm the best now. There's nothing more to improve. No, the devotee is always thinking how I can improve. That's the sign of humility. Actually, I'm very low. I need to improve a lot. That's how the devotee thinks. So then the devotee is contemplative, as we find here Maharaj Parikshit. In the purport, Prabhupada writes, the king, being a devotee of the Lord, did not approve of his own action. And thus he began to wonder whether the sage was really in a trance or was just pretending in order to avoid receiving the king. And then Prabhupada makes this beautiful statement. Of course, we could discuss it as a separate topic, but worth remembering the statement. Repentance comes in the mind of a good soul as soon as he commits something wrong. Repentance comes in the mind of a good soul as soon as he commits something wrong. And Prabhupada speaks about repentance in many places, especially in the pastime of Ajamil, when Ajamil repented for all the nonsense that he had done, when he saw the conversation between the Yamadutas and Vishnudutas. And there also Prabhupada writes that how repentance, so a devotee repents for his wrong activities, and then the sinful reactions are burnt up in the fire of repentance. So therefore, Prabhupada does write in those purports that how a devotee's repentance for his previous sinful activities, and therefore he prays to the Lord. So that's a devotee. A devotee therefore remains humble because he understands that I have committed so many wrong activities. And so as soon as a devotee does something wrong, he repents, even though he may have done it inadvertently. Srila Vishnu Acharya Thakur and Srila Jiva Goswami do not believe that the king's action was due to his past misdeeds, The arrangement was so made by the Lord just to call the king back home, back to God. So the point is repeated practically in every purport. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, the plan was made by the will of the Lord, and by the will of the Lord, the situation of frustration was created. The plan was that for his so-called misdeed, the king could be cursed by an inexperienced Brahmana boy infected with the influence of Kali. And thus the king would leave his hearth and home for good. His connection with Srila Shukadeva Goswami would enable the presentation of the great Srimad Bhagavatam, which is considered to be the book incarnation of the Lord. Yes. 32. The sage. So Maharaj Parikshit was wondering whether I did right or wrong. And in the meantime, what happened? The sage had a son who was very powerful, being a Brahmana's son. While he was playing with inexperienced boys, he heard of his father's distress, which was occasioned by the king. Then and there, the boy spoke as follows. So Prabhupada writes, this boy was known as Shringi, and he achieved good training in brahmacharya by his father so that he could be as powerful as a brahmana even at that age. So good training in brahmacharya makes a person qualified, powerful, but then the other part of the story, as Prabhupada will explain, is that he didn't have character and therefore his power caused problems. But because the age of Kali was seeking an opportunity to spoil the cultural heritage of the four orders of life, the inexperienced boy gave a chance for the age of Kali to enter into the field of Vedic culture. Hatred of the lower orders of life began from this Brahmana boy under the influence of Kali, and thus cultural life began to dwindle day after day. The first victim of Brahmanical injustice was Maharaj Parikshit, and thus the protection given by the king against the onslaught of Kali was slackened. And so that's how Kali affected Shringi and the Brahmanical class. And then the Brahmins began to exploit the other classes. And then we find that's how the entire degradation of the Brahmanas began. And when degradation of Brahmanas began, then everything degraded. And then the other orders, they stopped having respect for Brahmanas. No respect for Brahmanas means no taking instructions from Brahmanas. Then everything becomes degraded. So that's how then Kali Yuga had the influence. The Brahmana's boy Shringi said, "Oh, just look at the sins of the rulers who, like crows and watchdogs at the door, perpetrate sins against their masters, contrary to the principles governing servants." Okay, so immediately Shringi began to criticize the Kshatriyas. So Prabhupada is explaining about Varnashram and how it's based on guna and karma. So just because somebody is the son of a doctor or a high court judge doesn't make him a doctor or a high court judge. So, but even though there could be good chances, as he says, the son must take advantage of the father's qualification, thus become Brahmana or medical practitioner and not otherwise. Without being qualified, one cannot become a Brahmana or medical practitioner, and that's the verdict of all scriptural social orders. Here in Shringi, a qualified son of a great Brahmana attained the required Brahmanical power, both by birth and training. But he was lacking in culture because he was an inexperienced boy. Okay, so he had the power, he had the training, but he didn't have culture. He didn't have the qualification, he didn't have the etiquettes. That's culture. Culture means etiquette, sadachar. So then when the sadachar is not there, the culture is not there, then one misuses the power. By the influence of Kali, the son of a Brahmana became puffed up with Brahmanical power and thus wrongly compared Maharaj Parikshit to crows and watchdogs. So therefore, yesterday also we were discussing that how those who are leaders, Brahmana, sannyasis, king, and public leaders, Prabhupada writes there, should be tested crucially for their character. So Prabhupada further writes that even though they may have less academic qualifications, but they must have character. Why? Because if the character is not there, power is given, then they will misuse the power. So that's what's happening here. So therefore, the character is very important for somebody who has power. And that's what we find in the modern age. So unqualified people get power, then they misuse that. Thus, the downfall of Brahminical powers began as they gave importance to birthright without culture. The downfall of the Brahmana caste began in the age of Kali, and since Brahmanas are the heads of social order, all other orders of society also began to deteriorate. This beginning of Brahminical deterioration was highly deplored by the father of Shringi, as we'll find. So now Shringi is continuing to speak, and he says the descendants of the kingly orders are definitely designated as watchdogs, and they must keep themselves at the door. On what grounds can dogs enter the house and claim to dine with the master on the same plate? So in this way, he's criticizing Maharaj Parikshit. So Prabhupada writes here, this mentality of false prestige is the cause of downfall of the perfect social order. And we can see that in the beginning, it was started by the inexperienced son of a Brahmana. Okay, so false prestige, pride in the Brahmanas, that caused the downfall. And that principle always holds true. We have discussed this point also before. So pride comes before the fall. So whenever somebody becomes proud, and if it's devotees, then Krishna is definitely going to do something to smash the pride. 35. After the departure of Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead and the supreme ruler of everyone, these upstarts have flourished, our protector being gone. Therefore, I myself shall take up this matter and punish them. Just witness my power. So here, this puffed up boy, he wants to take power in his own hands. Who gave him the power? Of course, he was powerful, but he didn't know how to use the power. And so he's whimsically using the power. So of course, Prabhupada writes, the inexperienced Brahmana puffed up by a little Brahma Tejas became influenced by the spell of Kali Yuga. So this is the influence of Kali, that people who have power will misuse the power. So he's further down, he says, the personality of Kali Yuga, therefore seeking the opportunity to establish authority, and by the grace of the Lord, he found a hole in the puffed up, inexperienced son of a Brahmana. The little Brahmana wanted to show his prowess in destruction, and he had the audacity to punish such a great king as Maharaj Parikshit. He wanted to take the place of Lord Krishna after his departure. These are the principal signs of upstarts who want to take the place of Sri Krishna under the influence of the age of Kali. Okay, so people want to become self-appointed holders of power and then imitate the Supreme Lord and then misuse the power. Text 36, the son of the Rishi, his eyes red hot with anger, touched the water of river Kaushika while speaking to his playmates and discharged the falling thunderbolt of words. So then he pronounces curse. Text 37, the Brahmana's son cursed the king thus, on the seventh day from today, a snake bird will bite the most wretched one of that dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, because of his having broken the laws of etiquette by insulting my father. So that's how he pronounced his curse. And then Prabhupada writes, thus the beginning of the misuse of Brahmanical power began, and gradually the Brahmanas in the age of Kali became devoid of both Brahmanical powers and culture. So by misusing the power, then the power is taken away. So the Brahmanas misused the power, then they lost the power, they lost culture, they lost everything. And the whole Varnashram system degraded. 38. Thereafter, when the boy returned to the hermitage, he saw a snake on his father's shoulder, and out of his grief, he cried very loudly. So Prabhupada writes, the boy was not happy because he committed a great mistake and he wanted to be relieved of the burden on his heart by crying. So that's what happens. We usually find if one is feeling very guilty, then one actually cries. So the boy, even though in his puffed up situation, he cursed the king, but then he felt really guilty and therefore he actually began to cry. 39. O Brahmanas, the Rishi who was born in the family of Angira Muni, hearing his son crying, gradually opened his eyes and saw the dead snake around his neck. He threw the dead snake aside and asked his son why he was crying, whether anyone had done him harm. On hearing this, the son explained to him what had happened. So Prabhupada writes, the father did not take the dead snake on his neck very seriously. He just threw it away. So Shamik Rishi, he was not so much bothered. But then when he heard what the son did, 41, the father heard from his son that the king had been cursed, although he should never have been condemned, for he was the best amongst all human beings. The Rishi did not congratulate his son, but on the contrary began to repent, saying, alas, what a great sinful act was performed by my son. He is awarded heavy punishment for an insignificant offense. So here Prabhupada writes, even if there is something wrong with the king, he is never to be condemned. And he gives an example that a medical practitioner may kill a patient by mistaken treatment, but such a killer is never condemned to death. So what to speak of a good and pious king like Maharaj Parikshit? So Prabhupada explains this point in his lectures also, that when somebody who is in a big post and position, even if he commits something wrong, he should not be immediately condemned. And Prabhupada was talking about this in the context of President Nixon, the president of the United States at that time. Prabhupada used his example many times, maybe got some sukruti. So President Nixon, he had committed some scandals, and then people were protesting to throw him out of position. And so Prabhupada, speaking on that incident, Prabhupada says, no, that's not correct, because somebody is in a respectable position, then people should not immediately talk about it and condemn. Because actually, then not only just that person, but that position itself becomes condemned. And then anyone who occupies that position becomes condemned. So people in general lose respect, not for that one person, but for that position itself. So therefore, Prabhupada says that's not the proper way of dealings. And then what to speak if it's amongst devotees. So therefore, Prabhupada, also you can read in Prabhupada's pastimes. There was once a temple president who did something nonsense, and devotees again began to condemn him, talk about it, and gossip. So Prabhupada was very unhappy. Prabhupada said that so he may just go away and never come back because people are talking. So Prabhupada never appreciated such gossip. So Shamik Rishi also, he did not approve of the actions of his condemned son. 42. Oh my boy, your intelligence is immature, and therefore you have no knowledge that the king who is the best amongst human beings, in the previous verse it said Narendra is supposed to be the representative of God. Narendra. So, and therefore you have no knowledge that the king who is the best amongst human beings is as good as the personality of Godhead. He is never to be placed on an equal footing with common men. The citizens of the state live in prosperity, being protected by his unsurpassable prowess. Text 43. My dear boy, the Lord who carries the wheel of a chariot is represented by the monarchical regime. And when this regime is abolished, the whole world becomes filled with thieves who at once vanquish the unprotected subjects like scattered lambs. Okay, so Shamik Rishi is condemning the action of his son, because if the kings are, if the monarchical regime is abolished, then everyone will take advantage, and then so many thieves and rogues will flourish. 44. Due to the termination of the monarchical regimes and the plundering of the people's wealth by rogues and thieves, there'll be great social disruptions. People will be killed and injured, and animals and women will be stolen. And for all these sins, we shall be responsible. So Shamik Rishi is envisioning the future. So if there are no competent kings, then So many people, rogues and thieves will flourish, and then people will be injured and all that. And who's the root cause? We. So because Shringi cursed. So therefore he's taking responsibility for these activities. Text 45. At that time, the people in general will fall systematically from the path of a progressive civilization in respect to the qualitative engagements of the castes and orders of society in the Vedic injunctions. Thus, they'll be more attracted to economic development for sense gratification, and as a result, there'll be unwanted population on the level of dogs and monkeys. So he's again envisioning what will happen, that people will not, because there's no king to enforce that people are following dharma, the people will not follow dharma. And then if they don't follow dharma, then simply a life of sense gratification like animals. That's what will happen. (46) The Emperor Parikshit is a pious king. He is highly celebrated and is a first-class devotee of the personality of God. He is saint amongst royalty and has performed many horse sacrifices. When such a king is tired and fatigued, being stricken with hunger and thirst, he does not at all deserve to be cursed. So Shamak Rishi, as Prabhupada writes, Shamak Rishi thus admitted from all sides that Maharaj Parikshit was cursed most unjustly. And thus Rishi Shamika Brahman took responsibility for all deterioration of the good orders of the world. 47. Then the Rishi prayed to the all-pervading personality of Godhead to pardon his immature boy who had no intelligence and who committed the great sin of cursing a person who was completely free from all sins, who was subordinate and who deserved to be protected. Prabhupada writes, everyone is responsible for his own action, either pious or sinful. Man is the maker of his own destiny. So therefore, Shamak Rishi is praying to the Lord to protect his son because his son definitely did something wrong. Towards the end, Prabhupada says, the Lord never forgives a person who condemns his pure devotee. Therefore, by cursing a king, the foolish Shringi had committed not only a sin, but also the greatest offense. Therefore, the Rishi could foresee that only the Supreme Personality of Godhead could save his boy from his sinful acts. He therefore directly prayed for pardon from the Supreme Lord, who alone can undo a thing which is impossible to change. The appeal was made in the name of a foolish boy who had developed no intelligence at all. An important question Prabhupada is raising in the purport. A question may be raised here in that since it was the desire of the Lord that Parikshit Maharaj be put in an awkward position so that he might be delivered from material existence, then why was a Brahmana's son made responsible for this offensive act? The answer is that the offensive act was performed by a child only so that he could be excused very easily. And thus the prayer of the father was accepted. And then, but if the question is raised by the Brahmana community as a whole, was made responsible for allowing Kali into the worldly affairs, the answer is given in the Varapuran that demons who acted inimically towards the personality of Godhead but were not killed by the Lord were allowed to take birth in the families of Brahmanas to take advantage of the age of Kali. And the all-merciful Lord gave them a chance to have their births in the families of pious Brahmanas so that they could progress towards salvation. But the demons, instead of utilizing the good opportunity, misused the Brahminical culture due to being puffed up by vanity and becoming Brahmanas. Typical example. Okay, so that's the reason the boy was made instrument, so that the boy could be forgiven as the father is asking for forgiveness. And then he became an instrument for the Bhagavatam to be spoken. The next verse is an important verse where Shamak Rishi is glorifying the great devotees. Tiraskrita vipralabdha shapta kshipta hata api nasya tat pratikurvanti tad bhaktha prabhavopihi. The devotees of the Lord are so forbearing that even though they are defamed, cheated, cursed, disturbed, neglected, or even killed, they're never inclined to avenge themselves. As we just read, the devotees don't follow the policy of tit for tats. Rishi Shamik also knew that the Lord does not forgive a person who has committed an offense at the feet of a devotee. The Lord can only give direction to take shelter of the devotee. He thought within himself that if Maharaj Parikshit would counter curse the boy, he might be saved. But he knew also that a pure devotee is callous about worldly advantages or reverses. So Shamak Rishi was thinking that maybe if Maharaj Parikshit counter curses, his son could be saved. But he's not going to do that because Maharaj Parikshit as a devotee is very tolerant. So further down, Prabhupada says, as far as such things are concerned, in personal affairs, the devotees do not care for them. But in the case of they being performed against the Lord and his devotees, then devotees take very strong action. So we know this principle. So when it comes to personal things, the devotee is ready to tolerate. But if Lord and devotees are blasphemed or injured, then Prabhupada in one lecture says, then the devotee becomes like fire. Then the devotee doesn't follow the policy of Trinadapi. So he says, it is not that only the Brahmanas are powerful enough to award curses or blessings upon the subordinates. The devotee of the Lord, even though he may not be a Brahmana, is more powerful than a Brahmana. But a powerful devotee never misuses the power for personal benefits. Whatever power the devotee may have is always utilized in service towards the Lord and his devotees only. 49. The sage thus regretted the sin committed by his own son. He did not take the insult paid by the king very seriously. And finally, the last verse. Generally, the transcendentalists, even though engaged by others in the dualities of the material world, are not distressed, nor do they take pleasure in worldly things, for they are transcendently engaged. Purport. The transcendentalists are the empiric philosophers, the mystics and the devotees of the Lord. Empiric philosophers aim at the perfection of merging into the being of the Absolute. Mystics aim at perceiving the all-pervading Supersoul, and the devotees of the Lord are engaged in the transcendent loving service of the personality of Godhead. Since Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are different phases of the same transcendence, all these transcendents are beyond three modes of material nature. Material distress and happiness are products of three modes, and therefore the causes of such material distress and happiness have nothing to do with the transcendentalists. The king was a devotee, and the rishi was a mystic. Therefore, both of them were unattached to the accidental instant created by the supreme will. The playful child was an instrument in fulfilling the Lord's will. Okay, so both Maharaj Parikshit and Shamik Rishi, both of them didn't bother about the instant because they were on the liberated platform. But the boy became an instrument. Thus, in the Bhaktan purports of the first canto, 18th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam entitled Maharaj Parikshit cursed by a Brahmana. Okay, fine. So our time is up for today. So if there are any questions on this chapter, we will take them tomorrow, and then we will finish the last chapter of this unit tomorrow. Okay. All right, Balbal Kripa Prabhu. Okay, in any case. Okay,
that in the start of tomorrow's session, starting only if you, last time we had talked on phone about submission.
Okay, okay.
Starting only if you convey the message to all the devotees, it will be good, because in the session some devotee may leave for service and all the thing.
Achha. Okay, fine. When most of the devotees come, then we will, because
yes, I will inform you.
So that time we can announce. Okay. Okay, fine. Thank you all very much for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Granthiraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Samved Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.